You're listening to The Big Lift, the podcast of WebTrends Optimize, the CRO solution that enables marketers and developers to maximize the ROI on their digital properties. WebTrends Optimize is a powerful, feature-rich and easy-to-use solution, all delivered within a fixed-price contract with no additional cost for increased functionality ever. During these podcasts, we meet some of the key influencers within the marketing and conversion world to understand their roles and examine their challenges. Today, I'm talking with Matt Turner, CEO of the Creative Group. Over the last 17 years, Matt has developed an organisation of 6 companies, all based around different aspects of marketing. I talked to him about his business philosophy, how to get the best out of high-performing teams, and how an open and honest approach is always the best for clients. So Matt, there's quite a few companies within the Creative Group. Would you mind just spending a couple of minutes explaining what each one does?
Yeah, sure. So, the main company in the group is Creative Pod, and I started Creative Pod 17 years ago. So, yeah, it's been going a fair while now. But essentially, at Creative Pod, we either work on projects for clients like websites and rebrands and those sort of things, or essentially we become our client's marketing department for a fixed monthly fee or an extension of their existing offering. So, it's a very joined up, full service approach from a marketing perspective. We've also got a business in the group called Echo. I started Echo back in 2016, and Echo is a sponsorship brokerage business. So we sell sponsorship for sports teams, conferences, events, venues, and take a commission on that. And obviously, when you do a sponsorship deal, it tends to need a bit of PR and marketing afterwards. So you do often get a second bite of the cherry. And my very first acquisition was a digital print company. Cool, that was back in 2011. So we're very fortunate enough as an agency to have digital print in-house. So not only can we produce really nice collateral for ourselves, but we can also do it for clients and have control about colour, turnaround times and all those sort of things. We also have an SEO agency in the group. So I bought into them about 3 years ago, just before the pandemic started, because SEO is such a specific niche type of product within your marketing arsenal that you really do need specialist people, and having that within the group was and is such a valuable resource, not only for our clients but for prospects, for ourselves, and it enables us to kind of join up all the dots. And everyone should be doing a bit of SEO on their website these days. And then we've also got an office interiors business that I invested in and brought into the group about 4 years ago or so. And again, we're often doing graphics and designing interiors for people's office space. So for me, I'm kind of a big fan of owning a share, if not all, of your supply chain as well.
It seems like it, yes.
Yeah, it makes for a really interesting opportunity.
But in our discussions earlier, prior to this podcast recording, am I right in remembering that you left school with no qualifications, but an ambition to run your own company? What was it that stimulated that idea?
I think I'd always wanted to run my own company. I'd always been entrepreneurial, even as like a child, and came from a very sort of normal working class family in a semi-detached house. 2 brothers sharing a bedroom type thing. But I'd always had this drive to kind of want to be in control of my future rather than sort of work for the man, so to speak. Essentially, I left school, I think I was 15, 16, and I left with 11 GCSEs, and that was it. And a lot of people wanted me to go to college and university and so on and so forth. But I resisted and went straight out into the big wide world of work.
And was that something that was part of the plan, or was it just you just fell into it?
No, always part of the plan. So I think I would say it was probably at least 6 or 7 months before I finished school. I'd already been offered a full-time job. And I had emailed probably maybe 100 companies within sort of a 10, 15-minute walk of the train line, so to speak, saying, look, I'll work for you for free for the first month. And then after that, I want £6,000 a year, £500 a month.
That was a very ballsy approach, wasn't it?
I guess it really stood out. And someone gave me a chance and I proved myself. And I guess the rest is history. But that's how it started. So before I'd even sat an exam, I already knew I had a full-time job to move straight into.
But am I right in you trained as a graphic designer?
Yeah, very bad one at that.
That's something not to admit on a podcast, really.
I was really good at kind of like the visualization and selling the creative and coming up with the creative. I probably wasn't the best implementer of the creative, if I'm brutally honest.
So how did that sit with your clients, or was that working for somebody else at that
I
time?
was working for somebody else at that time, and did that. I worked as a designer for probably the best part of 3 years, and then when I started Creative Pod, again I started as a designer, would outsource the print, and built it up from there really.
If you've just admitted that you weren't a particularly good designer and you were getting the company to outsource, then did you manage to retain any clients really that meant on to be part of Creative Pod?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Because the thing is, it didn't take too long until before I could sort of employ somebody who really knew what they were doing, or were a talented designer, and I could focus on the people side of things and filling the funnel up, so to speak. So, yeah, I mean, I certainly knew what my weaknesses were right from the beginning, and knew what I had to do just to get over that initial hump, so I could afford to actually hire some proper talent to do a proper job, essentially.
So what age were you when you started?
When I started Creative Pod, I was 20. It was 4 or 5 days before my 21st birthday.
That's a pretty entrepreneurial spirit at 21.
Yeah, I just bought my first flat. I think I had 5 grand in the bank. I had a second-hand Mac, and I was sick and tired of working for absolute idiots. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to do this myself. I know that I've got sort of 3 or 4 months worth of sort of mortgage money. If I can't, cover the cost in 3 or 4 months, then I'll go and get a job.
And how long afterwards did you move to Dubai?
That was a bit of a temporary thing. That was probably around 2008, around the credit crunch, that kind of period. It was still sort of booming over there. I went on holiday, won a 100 grand project on holiday, and ended up delivering it and sort of traveling to and from and staying there on and off for probably the best part of 2.5 years.
And what compelled you to come back then? Sounds like an idyllic lifestyle over there.
You know what? Yeah, I mean, you say that. I mean, what you see isn't always what you get. And I think ultimately, because I was traveling to and from, and I would do sort of a month there, a week back here, then 2 weeks there, a week back here. There was a period during that time where I was nominated for Young Entrepreneur of the Year, and I ended up winning it. And a very drunken awards ceremony that evening, a journalist challenged me to what I was going to do next. And having a bit of a chip on my shoulder, I said, "Why don't you quit your job and we'll start a business together? And I'll show you what we can do next." And she did. Um, and we ended up starting a non-for-profit company called Young Startup Talent. It ran for the best part of 11 years. Kind of on ice at the moment, post-pandemic.
What was that in
We
aid of?
inspired 16 to 25-year-olds to start their first business, and there was a 50 grand prize. We ran it across 7 regions. We had about 600 youngsters come through it and start their first business, created about 3,000 jobs, and was a real force of good that I said I'd only do once. And 11 years later, it had turned into an absolute monster.
So were you doing that on an annual basis, this 50 grand?
Yeah. Yeah. And that was contributed to by sponsors, supporters, corporate partners.
Did you use that as your kind of pool for your own employees? Or was it just purely and simply for other companies to start their own businesses?
For other companies to start their own businesses. Yeah, we used to go into sort of all the schools, colleges, unis.
I dare say it was a good place to be able to get additional business from them anyway,
Yeah,
wasn't
I
it?
mean, you know what? It gave me something to talk about that wasn't just marketing. It made me stand out from the crowd. It made me philanthropic from a really early age, investing into like the talent of tomorrow. And fast forward 10 years, a lot of those youngsters are now running multi-million pound businesses and are clients of ours or introducers of ours. So, it does show you if you invest in the future, things grow and good things happen. But it gave me a platform to talk to and engage with different types of people and really just stand out from what my competitors are doing. And that's what I've always tried to do.
You mentioned just a short while ago that you won Young Entrepreneur of the Year in the UK. Did that actually help you build your client base? Was that part of the plan, or was that just something that happened?
Yeah, 100% it didn't. The one thing I would say is that if you ever do win an award for being a young entrepreneur, you can only dine out on it for about 9 years.
Only 9 years.
But it certainly serves a purpose. It differentiates you from others, puts you on that pedestal, but then you have to deliver. And that's what's really important.
So, in our early discussion, you have a number of topics which I think would be interesting to our listeners. And probably the one which I see is the most relevant to our listeners is probably the one that says how to get the most out of a high performing team. Surely motivation is seen differently by individuals. It's It's not a team thing, really, is it?
Um, it is a team thing. No, it's definitely a team thing. But each one of those members within the team is like a different gear in the gearbox. It's like a different cog in the engine, and they all
Hmm.
need to be treated differently. Some need to be treated the same. Some, are fired up in different ways. And being in the creative industries, people are different. They're not like normal, shall I say, people because they're creative. Their brains work differently. So some people are motivated by money. Some people are motivated by freedom. Some are motivated by recognition. Um, and I think what's key is that regardless of how everybody is motivated, everyone needs to know where the end goal is, what the direction looks like. But more importantly, everybody needs to be rowing at the same speed, even if that means some people have to row slower than their full capability.
Does that cause challenges amongst the team?
No, no, because everybody knows their role. Everyone knows their place. We all stay in our lane, and together we deliver. And again, I think that's really important.
In my experience, creative types are, I suppose, a lot of them are, how would you describe it?
Fragile.
Well, I wasn't going to use the word fragile. I think that's too simplistic. But they're very deep-thoughted people that have got a lot of thinking and often not a lot of speaking. So they're very capable of being able to think great things, but not very capable of expressing them in words, because a lot of it goes into their creative talent of what they produce from an artwork perspective or whatever. Do you find that difficult to be able to mix the team, perhaps with people who are very outgoing and very kind of, I suppose, bombastic versus those people who are more introverted?
I think that ultimately comes down to your recruitment. So, regardless of somebody's skill or talent or experience, if if we don't think they'll fit into the family or the group unit, shall we say, then they're not the right fit for us, regardless of how good they are. And that's really important, so that the personalities you're bringing into the team will get along, will work, will function, and will be high performing. And I kind of run the team and see the team a bit like a football team,
Yeah.
that you need a really solid spine, and that you don't need to win every game to win the league. And if you want to work
Mhm.
on bigger clients and bigger accounts, then there's a good possibility you might need better players. So you're often swimming in the pond you're in for a particular reason. I think going back to what you said about, some people having to do more than others depending on, skill sets and abilities. It's very similar in a football team. The goalie runs less kilometres than the midfielder, but nobody moans at the goalie for not running the same amount of distance. But they all have their role to play, ultimately in the success and performance of the team.
Does that mean that you employ only like-minded individuals?
Yeah, to a certain degree, yeah, definitely.
And do you have particularly criteria set out in your head as to what they are, or is it based upon what you see in front of you when you're recruiting?
I think the biggest one is they've got to have a sense of humour.
Ah, that's good.
If you can't laugh at something, then what can you do, to be honest? And I think that's really important, that they have that sort of sense of humour. Otherwise, we're probably not the right place for you either. I think that's something that a lot of people forget, is that employment works two ways.
Hmm.
Not only have you got to want to be here, but we've also got to want you to be here. So with a lot of the people that join the business, they'll do taster days and all the rest of it, so that we can decide collaboratively whether it's right for them. It's a bit like first dates, and at the end of it, we'll discuss quite openly whether we're right for them and they're right for us. And there's no hard feelings if it's not the case.
Does that mean that you've got a long onboarding process to be able to get people bedded in?
No, not particularly. We've got a very thorough onboarding process. So we have a very stringent interviewing process. I typically don't get involved in the interviewing. I leave that to the team. Again, something else I learned from football: you can't moan at your manager if you pick his or her team.
Is that a get out of jail free card for you, though?
I think when you run a business, there aren't many get out of jail free cards, so you take what you can, and the team are the backbone and the engine of the business. So that responsibility has to fall somewhere, and the senior leadership team are the ones that are working with their teams day in, day out. Whereas, I have a slightly different role. So that's really, really important from their perspective, that they're recruiting, foot soldiers that fit into their strategy, their team, their game plan. And again, that's how you kind of breed success and deliver results for clients. I think what you also have to remember is as well is that you have your clients' personalities, and you know what your clients are like, and you know how they act, and you know how they behave. So you also have to make sure that you recruit people that will be able to deal positively with that as well, because clients aren't always the easiest of characters at times.
The football analogy that you
Mm.
used would basically say that the manager rises and falls based upon his decisions, and that includes what players they should buy, how they perform on the field, their motivational skills, and things like that.
100%.
But it seems like you're absolving some of that responsibility to your team to be able to say, just bring people on who you think are going to fit. That's quite trusting in your approach, and probably very unusual with regard to onboarding new people.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, first of all, with onboarding, so the minute somebody accepts a job with us, that's when the onboarding starts. It doesn't start on their first day. By the time they arrive on their first day, they feel like they've been here a year because they know everyone. There's an element of familiarity, and that's really important. From a trust perspective, I think, you can't live your life being a paranoid, insecure shell of a person. You have to give people trust, and trust only really works in two ways. So either I give you 100% of my trust, and slowly over time you erode it, or I give you none of my trust, and over time you have to earn it.
That's a really good philosophy.
And if I'm brave enough to pay you every month, I trust you.
That's definitely quite different to certainly in the companies that I work for over the years, where they kind of you have to earn the trust.
Yeah, and well, the other thing is that if people don't feel trusted, they make bad mistakes because they're constantly second guessing themselves. They're constantly thinking, "What would he do? What would he say?" When actually, if you just relax into it, you'll deliver. And the other thing is that we have quite a firm philosophy here that it's okay to fail, but make sure you fail fast. I constantly tell the team a good sailor doesn't really learn anything in calm seas. So if it does ever get tough, that's a really good thing. It's fantastic.
Have you ever thought about writing a book about
Oh, I get
motivation?
asked all the time. It'll be full of expletives. Yeah, I've been asked a few times.
Because it's certainly a different viewpoint from many of the people that I've been interviewed by over the years, but it's quite a refreshing kind of, well, you've employed them, make it work kind of thing. And if it doesn't work, let's say goodbye and get in somebody
Yeah,
else.
100%. And I always say to everybody here, like, you all have to swim, but I won't let any of you drown. And again, that's a really good kind of mindset to have, because ultimately you'll be okay. You'll be fine. And yeah, I read a really interesting study actually, and it was a scientific experiment that somebody did in America on rats, and they put these rats in test tubes filled with water, and after about 14 minutes, the rat started to drown. The minute the rat started to drown, they took it out, they rested it for 2 minutes, they put it back in the water. When they put it back in the water the second time, it swam for 60 hours.
He knew what the downside was, obviously.
And the rat's brain knew that it wasn't going to die, and that if it came close to death, it would be saved. And I think the human brain often works that way as well.
It's a very interesting philosophy, and you've come across with a number of sound bites, which are obviously very useful, which people will take away and start to think of. But one of the other things that's inside your kind of topics is the thing about toxicity.
Yeah,
And I think that reflects well with, your kind of approach as being able to say, well, let people make mistakes, but make mistakes quickly. But if I'm right, you kind of mentioned the fact that you don't suffer fools easily. In fact, you have a banner in your office saying, no dickheads, please. Explain how this impacts your business and also the mantra for your personal life. Does it work on that too?
yeah, it does actually. Yeah, it took me probably took me 2 decades to realize that in every aspect of your life, there are people who are toxic, and sometimes you don't necessarily see it. Sometimes you think you have to tolerate it. Sometimes you even think, yeah, it's okay to put up with it, and you forgive them for their ways. And often you're too scared to actually get rid of them. Um, and toxic people work in different ways. Often can be controlling, manipulative, draining. To constantly take the good out of you and deliver very little back. And we all know what those sort of people look like. We all know what they sound like. And the minute you come across them, you have to remove them, regardless of who they are. And I always say to people, those individuals in your life, you need to view them like cancer. They need to be cut out as quickly as possible, and then you need to kind of get over it over a period of time. And as soon as you do that, you become happier, wealthier, healthier, more content. And it's probably one of the most liberating things you could ever do.
Do your employees feel the same way?
Absolutely. 100%. It's such a powerful message to have, because we all lose ourselves now and again. And sometimes, you have to say to someone, there's a reason we have that on the wall. And sometimes people forget what they don't know they're being a dickhead. And sometimes they need to be kind of realigned. And that applies to me, it applies to them, it applies to our clients, it applies to our suppliers. Because why would you want to be surrounded by people that are constantly bringing you down? The amount of people that I've come across in my life where I've told them I've been to Tenerife and they've been to 11 Reef is embarrassing. You know?
And cringing as well.
Life is far too short for that. And I would much prefer to surround myself with really positive, philanthropic, driven, entrepreneurial, decent people, rather than a bunch of people that are just constantly blowing hot air up each other's asses, trying to bring everybody else down around them. Some people enjoy seeing other people unhappy, and I'm just not one of those sort of people.
Toxicity is somewhat subjective. You mentioned, it's like a cancer, get rid of it. But cancer is you've either got it or you haven't.
Yeah, true.
Toxicity is something which some person might find that toxic, other people may not find that toxic. And I think working in a team environment, there are lots of different people. And I'm not going to use the word again, but what you mentioned on your wall is definitely there are people like that inside every business, I think. Thinking back of the companies I work for, there's always been those kind of mixture of toxicity in different guises, whether they're just cocksure of themselves or whether they're absolutely, always the wanting to make you feel insignificant or whatever it might be, always putting people down. But it must be really difficult. Who makes the decision on the toxicity of the person?
I think you can feel it. It's one of those things. I mean, we're really fortunate in the team. Very, very, very rarely does it happen. I think the other thing is, though, we've all got the ability to be toxic. And the reason we have that ability is often because of the environment that we're in. So if someone is being toxic, it's typically because they're unhappy with something. It could be something at home. It could be something at work. It could be something, you would have no idea of. But because we kind of have a nip it in the bud policy, we can do exactly that. We can nip it in the bud and we can address it and we can talk about it and we can fix it. And if we can't fix it, then we know what the next step is. And that works with everybody.
But that must take a lot of your time in mentoring and nurturing these people to be able to find out more. I mean, there's this philosophy that's 360-degree feedback, which a lot of the larger organizations have been using for maybe a decade or so, where you get feedback on yourself from your colleagues. Do you kind of work that idea?
To a certain degree, yes, but it needs to be sincere and it needs to be not what we want to hear. So we have a very open book here, really. Even from the top to the bottom. If something needs raising, then that's exactly what we do. And it's how you motivate people and how you kind of open their eyes to things and educate people that enables you to nip that in the bud. Yes, it's time consuming, but it should be time consuming because I want to get the best out of the people in my business. And therefore, I want them to give the absolute best to our clients. Because if you do that, it's a rinse and repeat process, and everybody wins, and that's really important to me. So we have lots of things within the business that maybe are a little bit unorthodox compared to most businesses, but they're really, really powerful. They're really impactful, and they enable me to kind of kill 3 or 4 birds with one stone.
Now, I noticed from your website, you actually have that phrase front and center in your website.
Yeah.
That potentially might put some clients
Absolutely.
off. And also it may potentially become the mantra, as opposed to what I would say is treat people with respect or whatever it might be. It's a very harsh way of being able to come across and have a, if you like, a feeling of what the company's
Yeah.
about. That must work for you because you're obviously pretty successful. Have you had any clients that have kind of thrown their toys out the pram because of it?
Yeah, I mean, I've had, I've had clients ring me up and say, I've been looking for a marketing agency. I've come across you guys. I've seen what's on the wall on your website. I want to come and see you, and I want to work with you. And they don't care about price because they have been stung before, and they have worked with agencies that say yes to everything and deliver nothing. And finally, they feel like they have found someone that is on the same wavelength as them. I've also very recently, even just before Christmas, I had a big pitch that we did, and out of the four directors, three of them said they loved us and wanted to work with us, and the main shareholder said he wouldn't work with someone who's got profanities written on their wall, and I thanked him for doing me a favour. So, because the relationship's not going to work, if that
Yeah.
offends you, then you're definitely not the right sort of person to work with us. If that offends you, you should probably be working for the council or selling ice cream or something.
Often the caricature of an ad agency or a marketing agency is one of a group of yes people. It sounds like your message is much more, we think we've got the right message for you. It's almost either like it or lump it. Would that be true?
100%. Because if somebody's not on the same sort of mentality or wavelength as us, they're only going to slow us down later on. And that's not good. I want to be motoring forward with our clients. We take our clients away on like a long weekend every year. Literally 6 months ago, we took 40, 50 clients away to Devon on an adventure weekend. We build bonds, we build relationships. And the only way you can do that is with people who are like-minded. And I think we're living in such a sensitive kind of PC world at the moment where, you can't say boo to a goose and you get in trouble. Like, who would have thought 5 years ago that the song
Yeah.
Delilah was going to be banned? Like, where does it end?
Yeah, I can appreciate that. Yes, definitely.
Okay. We'll save that for another time, maybe.
Yeah, save that for another time. One of the things that actually leads on from it is that you've come across as being what I would describe a no nonsense kind of guy that runs a business which is a no nonsense kind of business. Yeah, you're quite philanthropic as well because you're associated with a number of charities. So what motivates you in that? It's almost kind of the flip side of your no nonsense approach. There's this sympathetic approach. Was it something that was stimulated by personal circumstances?
Yeah, I mean, it probably was. I mean, I really love all the charitable stuff we do, and we've done it consistently now for a very, very long time. Very long time. And I think over the last sort of 11 years or so, we've donated more than £1 million to charities across Sussex. I'm a patron of a number of charities. My wife is a trustee of a number of charities. We probably sponsor 10 to 15 different charity balls across the year. So for me, I like to be able to kind of use my skill set, my contacts to support these charities because they're doing amazing things across our community. There's probably an element of karma in there as well. So by supporting such wonderful causes, you hope that you'll never have to be a customer.
It's very true.
Okay. Also, the other thing is I've got children as well, so it sets a really good example to them. It sets a really good example to the team. It's a really good way of, again, differentiating ourselves from our competitors. It's also actually another good litmus test for people you come across to see what category they fall in. Often we'll ask prospective clients whether they would be willing to do anything charitable as part of their sort of PR and marketing efforts. And now and again, you come across somebody who says no. And I can already tell that sort of person probably isn't the right type of client for us.
How many charities do you support?
I reckon we probably support 15 different charities or so. Chestnut Tree House, Star Trust, Martlets, the Wolo Foundation, Focus Foundation, St. Peter's and St. James, Rocking Horse. They're the ones I can remember off the top of my head. There's so many of them, and we take great pride in the work that we do for them and the way we support them. Raisted, the animal charity we work with.
You must
So
eat
yeah,
a lot of charity dinners.
yeah, literally, I was one on Saturday night. I was at the Focus Foundation ball, and we raised 80 grand. So it was great. It
That's
was
pretty
fantastic.
impressive. So, if you were looking at your epitaph, what would you like to be known as? You know, not necessarily what they put on your headstone, but what would you like people to remember you by?
I think first and foremost, somebody who tried, because you can't really knock a trier.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean you always succeed, but for me, that's probably the most important attribute. Something I really try and drill into the children, that you know, as long as you try, it doesn't really matter what the outcome is. If you're not good enough, you're not good enough, but you tried. And I think the second thing would be that you'll always get an honest opinion from me, even if you don't like it. I'll be that person that tells you what everybody's too frightened to tell you. And it served me really well.
I'd love to see your gravestone. Hopefully, not in the too distant future.
Let's hope not.
But that's quite an interesting way of being able to say, well, you know, Matt was a trier. You know, it was a nice kind of philosophy to have, to be able to say you're trying. You're not always going to be successful, as you say, but you know, I say to my own kids, you know, just try your best. And if you're doing your best and you don't get the results that you were expecting, at least you know you've tried your best. And
Yeah, and you can always try again.
and it's okay to be a B grade student if you've tried to be an A grade student.
100%.
Yeah,
Yeah, 100%. I mean, grades really only tell you how good your memory is, really, don't they?
I totally agree with you. Matt,
Yeah.
it's been an interesting discussion, somewhat different to what we'd normally have on a podcast, because you've definitely given us some guidelines around motivation and being able to deal with toxicity. So I thank you for your time. I would love at some point in the future to catch up with you again, see how things are turning out. Because at the moment you've got 4 or 5 different companies. Who knows what it's
Yeah.
going to be like in another 2 or 3 years, how many more you might accumulate. But for now, Matt, it's been a great time and we will undoubtedly speak again.
John, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.